Welcome everyone. Welcome. The many parties involved tonight. Tonight we will investigate in which ways action can be taken. You can start a climate center, which is the case from Albert and Cheryl. You can do Extinction Rebellion action, and Jan will speak about that. Which one is the most effective one to set things in motion, because that's what's really necessary. We have 3 guests tonight. I'm very happy. Unfortunately, Mirjam Bluising, who was also on the list, was not able to come. She had to resign because her contract with the climate center ended. That's because of the bezuiniging and savings of the University of Twente. Very unfortunately. But luckily, we have Albert van Berg and Cheryl de Boer in our midst, and of course Ernst-Jan Kuiper. Albert van Berg, to start with, is a distinguished professor, university professor at this university. His current research interests, among many others, are micro and nanofluidics, labs and organs on chip, and sensing for health and sustainability. That's of course very important. And Albert is quartermaster, one of the quartermasters of the Climate Center. And Cheryl de Boer is assistant professor at the ITC faculty. You're expert in the field of urban climate adaptation, which is very interesting, I think. Energy transition in the Netherlands you're monitoring. And you're also one of the founders of this climate center. That's very important. And then Ernst-Jan Kuiper, I will introduce you in one row, how to say. You're a climate scientist and activist. Ernst-Jan holds a PhD in the field of glaciology. He studied the dynamics of the Greenland ice sheet, which is of course melting. He works at Milieudefensie, and that translates into English as the Friends of Our Earth in the Netherlands. And in Milieudefensie you are dealing with the climate case against Shell. That's a very important case against one of the big fossil polluters. And you're an active member of Extinction Rebellion, so we already met your colleagues. Okay, that was quite a few words. Let's get started with the Beauty Climate Center. Albert and Cheryl, can I ask you to come to the floor? I will put your presentation in.
Thanks everyone for being here. When they asked us to come and say some things about the Climate Center, of course, we thought, yeah, we would love to. But then the question is, what do we say? So we put together a couple slides to give you a bit of a feeling for where did the Climate Center start, what are our goals and ambitions, and sort of how do we see our place in this discussion. And I don't know if it's allowed, but I welcome questions throughout the presentation, if that's if that's fine. Because of course we really want to hear from you also what you think and how you feel about this little center of ours. So where did the Climate Center come from? For those of you who remember, way 3 years ago, we had this thing called Shaping 2030, right? So the university's vision for the future. And within this vision, they mentioned sustainability quite a lot. Right? So if you read sustainability, but it wasn't really clear as to what that meant. Right? So how do we actually do this at the university? And so they asked a number of groups to look into this, and Albert and I were in one of these groups. And so it was our job to do some research, to speak to different people, and figure out how can we get sustainability more embedded into the university. And actually the results, as I said, we had sort of 2 pieces of advice at the end. And so from a campus and facilities perspective, we saw that there was a lot already happening, but that more structure and a bit more seriousness could be given to that area. And we suggested a sustainability task force. And on the other side, we saw on the research and education side that there was a real need and a real urgency felt by the staff and students to do more on the climate topic. And so we suggested, at the time we called it the Climate Initiative should start. And then Albert and I actually just felt a bit more comfortable with the Climate Initiative, and so we took that on as the coordinating team. But we support Berg and all the work that they're doing on the Sustainability Task Force as well, because it also is really important. So yeah, at that time also it was a bit of a window of opportunity because it was in the news, right? So there was more and more, and luckily people from Extinction Rebellion and other people were making noise, which gave us a little bit more support for justifying that we needed to do something here. And so that we really used to argue that we needed to do something. But it still also wasn't clear at that time, what should we do, right? So we know that we need to do something. And so something that I like to use in these kinds of decision-making processes is Ikigai. And for those of you who are not familiar with this, it's sort of a way of looking at the world and trying to find how can I find my role in it and what can I do. And here's just one definition. So a motivating force, something or someone that gives a person a sense of purpose or a reason for living. And what we found with the topic of climate is really, there was a lot of passion, right? So, you know, what do we love? We love working on things that we think are going to make the world a better place and where we can put our needs or put our expertise into play. And so we looked a little bit at the UT, a bit from this perspective, and figured out what can we do. And so we looked, what is actually the university good at, right? So what kind of expertise can we contribute? I remember one comment was made, what makes the UT Climate Center different than every other climate center who's working on these kinds of things? And so we thought a little bit about that. And what we recognized is that, particularly in the Netherlands, we are actually one of the only universities that has a really strong geo faculty, a social science faculty, and 3 strong technical faculties. And we thought, can we maybe do something with that? And certainly from a strategic perspective it makes sense, but we also really think that there's value added in looking at climate challenges and the climate crisis from this transdisciplinary collaboration perspective. And so that's one of the things that we thought we could make a difference at. And then what does the world need, right? So we're looking at that, what actually can we provide? And we can certainly provide people with skills, right? So people with skills for the transition. So how do we actually get to that future? I personally am involved in a lot of education activities, and I really like education as a topic. And what I see is at the university, one of our biggest ways to create impact is through the students that we train and support and help into the world and give them the skills that they need in order to make the transition. And that's not just knowledge about chemical processes or lab on a chip or other things, but also how to look at things in a complex systems way and how to look at things in a collaboratory way. Right? So these are skills that we think that we can help deliver to enable the transition. And where can I get support for my work? In the other Ikigai, they said, what can I get paid for? But I don't really like putting it that way, so I changed it a little bit to where can I get support? So where can I get enough resources to make it possible for me to do the things that I want to do? And so we did also a little bit of scanning for all of the different grants, it's all the typical funding sources that we have at the university, and there are a lot, right? So there are lots of ways to support also the work that we want to do and in the way that we want to do it. And these are just a few, right? So that we also recognize that if you're going to do this kind of work at the university, then we also need to be able to fund it. And so as a bit of a result of this, we came to a little bit of our Ikigai, which I kind of summarized in these 3 propositions that we, I think at the time, submitted to the executive board and said, this is what we want to do as the Climate Center. So we want to increase our impact on climate challenges, and we want to do this together with stakeholders. And that's for research, for education, and for entrepreneurship. And stakeholders are in the local community, national, but also international different partners. And one thing that we really noticed is that there was so much work going on in education and research on climate-related topics. So different challenges, different types of research, but nobody saw it, right? So we didn't have a way to sort of communicate what we were doing. And for that, I think students and staff, they need support. And this last, we really wanted to develop further this geotechno-social approach to see if it really is worthwhile moving forward. And because it's an idea at the moment and we need to do some research and do some experimenting to see actually what value it has. So, like any good center, once we decided that we were going to be a center, we had to come up with a vision and a mission. And at the moment, this is what we came up with. And something that for example, in the vision, which we really are working towards now, is a community, right? So really bringing people together on this topic who may not have come together otherwise, right? So they can actually work together, from somebody from Albert's group and then somebody from the BMS faculty, where they can actually come together and understand that we're all working towards a similar goal. And transdisciplinarity, right? So really bringing also in the external world, so not only from the university deciding what kinds of things should be working on, but really working together with external partners to figure out what kinds of challenges are there that we can contribute to. And the final, so our mission, so what we really want to achieve is to empower students and staff, right? So again, so we noticed that there was so much going on, but there was not a lot of support from the upper levels for people working on these things, and so we wanted to change that. Our 5 guiding activities, so we work on community, so bring people together. For those of you who have been, we've had climate cafes, right? So really an informal way to bring people together to talk about these issues. We had a really nice climate colloquium 2 or 3 weeks ago with Deborah Roberts, one of the ACCC members. So really just a way to sort of motivate people to start working together. And of course we look at research, impact, education, and really working on visibility. So if people don't know what's going on, they also can't make use of it. And so this geotechnosocial approach, we've started a little bit there, and these are some of the things that we think it can do to increase our impact, right? So really integrating research from different disciplines, right? Not just a chemist and an engineer working together, but actually really people with really broad and wide perspectives, not only on the types of solutions, but how to define the problem in itself. And that we really think that you can create new knowledge this way, right? So by looking at the problems differently, from different perspectives, you can make new types of theories and new types of knowledge. And I think what is really important too is, even though we focus on this geotechnosocial, a lot of the research that we're doing at the university is not geotechnosocial, and that's also really okay and really fine and should keep going. So we don't just think that this transdisciplinary approach is the only way, but we think that it needs extra support because it's also not so easy to do, and it takes a lot of effort to work across faculties. In the last, I would say, 6 months to a year, we've had a lot of discussions with the different staff and students working on these climate-related issues, and what we decided is to sort of try to summarize them in these different challenges, because climate is also quite a broad topic when it comes to different research and different educations, and it can really hold all kinds of different research, right? So you can also say the same thing about sustainability, right? So sustainability is everything, sustainability is nothing, climate is everything, climate is nothing. What do we mean actually when we talk about it? And so we have here 8 different challenges, and I think actually one is hiding behind those batteries. You can see that little dot.
Which one is it?
That's planetary health. So planetary health is hiding behind the batteries right now. And and this is just a way to bring people together, because sometimes what we notice in research themes or programs, people tend to get a bit, or they try to put lines in between them. What we wanted was to bring people together, to say, okay, you know, I'm really good at this particular type of math modeling, and I can apply that to this particular challenge, right? So even if you didn't consider yourself to be a climate researcher or an educator, you can still see how your work contributes to one of these different challenges. And these are not set in stone, and these can change, and it's really just a bit of a way of working to help us work together towards action. And one thing that I really, I try to remember and I try to hold important in a lot of the decisions that we make, is that I really believe that action can address climate anxiety. Right? So something that we also notice is that there is a lot of depression and a lot of anxiety, particularly in the student population. And not just with climate, but for everything, I really believe that action can help, right? So when you actually feel like you're making a contribution and you're doing something towards it, you feel less powerless, you feel more in control. And I think that's really important, because we need everybody to be in action, right? So we can't really afford to spend too long being depressed, and what we try to give to the community is a way forward, right? And I think also when we act, and we act together, then that helps us also feel like we're achieving something and can motivate us to keep moving. this is just one slide also about these skills, right? So skills, I think, are something that we don't yet do enough of in terms of education, right? So I know that the university really works on challenge-based learning, and we have the TOM model, so we do a lot of project-based education, and that is really getting into society and working together. But I think that we could do a lot better in terms of identifying what skills are really needed for our students in the coming years. And this is just a little bit of promotion from the UT. If you're looking for courses and you think, I want to do something on climate, here are some examples of just some of the courses that, if you're interested in these topics, there are options out there, right? And maybe they lie within your program, maybe they don't, but what we're trying to do is increase this, right? So one of the goals of the Climate Center is to finalize an inventory of all the different climate-related educational programs and identify new ones, right? So identify where there's gaps and where we can contribute more. So my last slide, there's enough to do. We don't have all the answers, but really, and I think particularly for this discussion, this is something that we're trying, right? And we're seeing how we can contribute and whether or not we can create better impact through connecting together, through working together, let's go. So thank you.
Thank you very much for the clear presentations. You mentioned a lot of things. Maybe I can go into a couple of them. You mentioned climate depression. Yesterday I heard the news about the 3 degrees and I got a little bit depressed myself. I'm a pretty optimistic person, but when I read all the news I thought, goodness me, this is really terrible what's going to happen. I'm just wondering who has some climate anxiety or depression, or I guess yes, I think it's a really depressing thing because you can't. You're so.
Can I make
yes, of course.
A small addition? I don't know
Is
if
is your mic on? Let me see.
I think so.
I think it's working. Yes, it was on.
Okay.
Sorry.
No problem.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I think that one additional point that maybe you did not mention is that I think there's 2 aspects that really motivated also. One is the urgency. It's absolutely urgent that we do something, and that also motivates us a lot. Yeah. And the other thing is responsibility. I think that we are a university, we are a bunch of smart people sitting together. We do have to do something. We have an obligation to society to act and to show what we can see and use our knowledge to do something. Yeah. And sometimes I also feel a bit depressed and anxiety, but also I feel like we can do a lot as society, as humans. But we only need to be all convinced. We have had COVID, we spent 50 billion or so, and it was, in the end, not really affecting us at the basics. So if we really want, we can do a lot, but we should all be convinced this is a war on climate change, so to say. Yeah. Then it will work, but so far the politicians are just too afraid, too short-sighted to do something. Yes, you mentioned COVID. It's a very good example, I think, because then it was possible to make a vaccine in a very, very short time. Because in normal times it would take, I think, 5 years or 10 years perhaps. Now it could be. So I think if everybody in the whole world is fully convinced we have to act now, but that is the problem. Yes, and how do we solve this then we need, problem? We need action. We will hear from Ernst-Jan about the action. But first, the Climate Center. You mentioned a lot of research already going on at the university for batteries, for instance, carbon dioxide removal, things like that. Those are existing projects. Does the Climate Center also initiate its own projects? Is it? Yeah, can you?
Yeah, so we had in the spring a seed funding call, and we had just small amounts of money. So we don't have a huge budget at the Climate Center, but we had some money available, and we really wanted to sort of put it out there. And the only requirements that we had, so I think it was 30,000 euros or something, and they had to spend it by the end of the year. And we really wanted it to be something which had a geo-techno-social aspect. And we were astounded at how many proposals we got. Right, so I think we had about 190,000 available, and we were asked for over 1 million. Okay. Right? And it was really, really encouraging to see how many people were willing to really quickly say, "This is an idea that I have, where I think I can contribute to this cause."
Okay, okay. And can you mention a couple of the
Yeah.
ideas which were...
So ones that come to mind is related to geothermal on campus, right? So there is quite a lot of expertise about geothermal as an energy source. And so their proposal was to look at it from also an educational perspective. So what kind of additional education could we provide on that topic? How could we connect better to stakeholders? And could we actually even put a geothermal plant on campus?
Yeah.
Cool.
That's related to the Lila Living Innovation Lab. And that also, I think, is a link that is now being developed, where they are soliciting for projects that can be shown to the society. And here we really want to team up with also Saxion and even ROC, because I think we need everyone, you know, not only university, we need to stimulate also other societal partners. So that really is a co-production.
Yes, I understand. And how many people are working right now as a climate? You're the founders. How big is the center, just to get an impression?
Well, paid people, not so much.
No,
but the community is large. We had, let's say, I mean, in many climate cafes, we had always 50 to 100 people.
Okay.
And they're all interested. Can you say how big it is? I think if you ask everybody at university, are you involved in climate type research or education? I think you will find 50% of people say yes.
Yeah, okay.
So I think there's a lot of motivation, but it should be more visible and more on the foreground, I think.
Yes, yeah. And suppose you're a depressed student, very worried about the climate, and you want to join the climate center. How can students do this? Should they send you an email, or could you comment a little bit more?
We do have an email address that you're welcome to send. Oh, it's not there. It's on the first slide. So certainly, and what we're trying now to do is, so we have a year plan also for next year. So we're also quite new, right? So for us, it's also figuring out what works. How can we get people involved? What kind of activities can we do?
Yes.
And so, but if there are students who are willing to volunteer or to work with us, then we can definitely work together on different kinds of activities. And we hope that we can have more research projects next year. Something that we also need to do is finish the inventory of climate-related education, right? So that's also something students can help with. So there are many things to do, and now we have to figure out what kind of resources do we have in the future to do all of
but you
those
can
things.
also help us to call out to the deans or to the board and say that it's very important, that it's very relevant, because there's a lot of slow motion, so to say. We call it in Dutch meestribbelen. And that is, let's say, people say yes and then they very slowly act. But I think we have to get things in motion at this moment.
Okay. Are there any questions for... Can I have your mic, Albert, and I walk to this. So, go ahead.
Yes, thank you for this presentation. It's also one thing that we were discussing already, also because I was here last week with Florence Smith's presentation. I was wondering if you see like the policy side already in the social side, because me as like a climate researcher looking at the things, I think all the technologies are basically there. Of course, they can be improved, but the political will is missing. And she showed that also when we have independent bureaucracies, which is like anti-democratic and so on, that they can often enact policies more efficiently than political election cycles, which is why in many countries where we don't have those bureaucracies, a lot less is happening. And so I was just, and I also talked to some people in the sustainable energy technology masters who were disappointed that they didn't get insight into policy. And so I was just wanting to advocate that we would like include policy also in the center, maybe also more explicitly, because also a lot of research is happening here.
That's a good point. Yeah, definitely. And I certainly consider policy as part of the social component. And what was really interesting also, when we sent out the seed call, we got actually a lot of requests from technical people. Can you couple me with a social scientist? Because I don't know any, right? And so it was really interesting to see that there was this interest, right, to understand more about the policy or behavioral change aspects, but those relationships weren't there yet. So that's certainly, I see it as really valuable, and I think one of the key things that we need to work on.
You mentioned it very quickly, behavioral change. I think that's one of the key questions in this whole situation, because everyone, I think, is aware of the climate crisis and something needs to be changed. But how do people change? First, I'm maybe a bit cynical. There has to be a disaster, and then people start thinking, oh, well, maybe we should do something. Could you comment on this? How can we set people's minds in motion? That's
I'm afraid this is true. I mean, you need a couple of floodings or something like that before people start to realize, okay, it also affects me.
Yeah.
And this is how we humans, I'm afraid, work. And I think that's why we need to make it more public what is happening and make people aware. But then still, it will take a couple of tornadoes or floodings before people, or maybe death by heat stress or something like that. And then it will start, and hopefully it's not too late, because that's my fear that the tipping point will be over by then. But that's why we have to act already now.
But I think there are different theories on this, right, in terms of behavioral change and how you actually get people to change their behavior. But I also think that maybe we spend too much time worrying about behavioral change. And we spend too little time talking about policy change and system transitions, because if people are creatures of habit, like we know a lot of people are, then, and we know how much effort it takes to change the way that you do things, then maybe we should spend our time better at system level change, as opposed to worrying so much about whether or not I have, I don't know, maybe coffee from the wrong brand or like also important, also really important, but.
And then you mean the political level.
Exactly.
So the government should set strict rules, don't eat meat or something like that.
Well, political bodies, but also businesses, right? So people with an impact on more systematic change.
Yeah, maybe we should mention also that we are a hub in the National Climate Research Initiative Netherlands, the KIN. And the KIN is focusing fully on system transitions. So the energy system, or maybe even the democratic system, or so, representation, or the way we take decisions. And I think really, I agree with you, we should do that, but we should do everything we can. It's not or this or that, it's and. So I think because the system change or system transition also takes time. It's not from today to tomorrow. It takes 10 years or 20 years. And maybe sometimes a little faster, but it really takes time.
Okay. A small question, yes, go ahead.
It's more like a comment, because I want to disagree with it's and. There is clear opposition, and that's what is also missing from my mind in like the themes of the climate center. I read this as like a post-political agenda where everything is only stated in terms of technical problems that have a technical solution. You won't find a class division in like the problems that are listed, like how can we mobilize people to engage in political struggle against the financial interests that are profiting from the destruction of our environment. It hides away the research that is still being done at UT that is advancing the crisis. We still do research on how to extract more fossil fuels from already existing extraction sites, how to build robots that do maintenance work of fossil fuel infrastructure and so on. So it's not and. There is a clear opposition between positions.
I think this is no more the case now. There's now really a committee that checks. You cannot collaborate with the fossil fuel industry. Only if there's really a very clear following of the Paris agreements, then on a certain restriction you can collaborate. And definitely not on more fracking or recovery of more oil, but only on very restricted topics.
What is this for kind of committee? Where is it?
But there's a sort of ethical or whatever committee that, let's say, regards, let's say, the proposals before they are accepted. Before you can make a contract, you have to submit it to this committee, and they will look if the company which you collaborate with is subjected to the Paris agreements in practice also, not only in words, but also in practice. And it has to start yet, so I agree, we don't know how it will work, but I think we have to be very strict here, absolutely.
But so exactly, it doesn't exist yet, and it's in the process of being established, and this is where I personally see the politics at University of Twente playing out at the moment, like who will sit in this committee, which kind of regulations, whose interests are going to be heard, whose interests are not going to be heard. And it's not end-end, so we have to figure out how, because there's PhD positions hanging on fossil fuel research, there's also in collaboration with those industries.
But was our suggestion to have one person of XR in the committee as well? So then they can voice out what they think, and I think that it will be established beginning of next year. And definitely there will be deans in there will be scientists in there, but also an Extinction Rebellion representative. In my view, that should be done.
Okay. And you were suggesting that, just to comment a little bit more on your question, that you were hiding certain things, the shell business in your model. Is that
no, I think what he was saying is that our focus on those particular challenges doesn't allow us to look deeper, right? And I think it's a good point.
okay.
I don't have an answer for it yet, but I think so. One of the reasons why we focused on challenges, and those challenges are not set in stone, right? So we'd be happy to add some, take some away, change them. But the reason for focusing on challenges per se is also because we wanted to act, right? Because we were looking for things where we could really make a contribution to in the short term. And just like I think that we focus on transdisciplinary research and education, it doesn't mean that other stuff isn't really important and that we shouldn't also support that kind of research as well.
Okay, thanks. Go ahead.
Rather than defining a completely new committee, why don't you integrate this sort of thinking in an ethics committee that usually judges, evaluates new research proposals? Because then you have something to work on immediately. And being a technician myself, I've seen for many, many years that technical people are very good at selling, gosh, I've got a problem here, now I've solved it, and do that in isolation as an abstract solution, rather than looking at all the other aspects that we're influencing, Because very often technicians have the tendency to focus on one abstraction and forget about the new damage being done. So these things could be incorporated into an ethics committee, and that, I think, could be really helpful. Also because the infrastructure exists, you might just piggyback and put new policies in place in those places.
Albert.
I think there is at least a medical ethical committee.
Thank you.
And I can assure you this is really quite strict, and definitely not only looking at the technical aspects, but many more. And I think this will be a committee that doesn't look at medical ethical issues, but more climate or sustainability ethical issues. And I'm quite confident that it will not purely, because there are people in there who are really also very skeptical, and they're really critical about collaboration with fossil industry. But it's too easy to say it's totally excluded from the point zero, because there's really there's also a gray zone. I know there's some companies that really are no-go, and some topics are really no-go, but there are maybe topics where you can have a discussion, and it's not fixed. It will be developed over time. What is the type of project that we can do and we cannot do? But I'm, let's say, I'm also myself very critical. I've had discussion with the CEO of Shell Holland, and I asked him, "Are you serious?" And I could see he was not serious in following the Paris Agreement. So I'm absolutely not in favor of. I would not collaborate with Shell, so to say, myself. But I mean, I'm not saying that nobody can ever collaborate with Shell. Maybe, but it's very critical, absolutely.
And I actually really like the idea of incorporating sustainability within the standard ethics procedure. And this was something that we also suggested in the beginning. And another aspect that I think could be really interesting is currently when students also write a paper or a report, they often have to do an ethics paragraph. And I think that we should also incorporate some sort of guidance for how to involve these kinds of topics in ethics in general. And I think so these ethics committees, then we would have to make sure that they have the expertise to be able to make a good judgment, right? And so we need to find where those people are.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think we give the stage to Ernst-Jan Kuiper. He's going to talk about his Extinction Rebellion activities, among other things.
Sure.
A big hand for Ernst-Jan, please.
Can you all hear me? Yeah, I think I can hear myself. So, my contribution to this evening will be quite different, I guess. I think, and I just saw that quite a lot of people are already struggling with climate anxiety, just like myself, by the way. But I always insist, at least to myself, that I start or end each and every talk with a short update of where we are with the climate science. So that's what I'm going to do. About a week ago, a new paper was released estimating the carbon budget for 1.5 degrees. And we have about 250 gigatons of CO2 left before we hit 1.5 degrees. And with current emissions being over 40 gigatons a year, we will hit 1.5 degrees in about 2028. If we want to reduce if we're gonna reduce our CO2 emissions from today and want to stay within the budget, we will have to be net zero CO2 by 2035. That's what the paper concluded, while our government and most governments in the world are aiming for 2050 or later. And the problem with that is that climate change, of course, will go over 1.5 degrees. And by doing so, we probably pass a number of tipping points in the climate system, which includes the Greenland ice sheet, the topic of my research, will probably collapse at somewhere between 1.5 and 2 degrees of global warming. We're looking at the destruction of the tropical coral reefs at above 1.5 degrees. Part of the permafrost will be gone, and the West Antarctic ice sheet will also probably be lost at 1.5 degrees. And as Peter already said, a report was released yesterday that the world is heading for about 3 degrees of global warming under current policies, while at the same time our governments promised to do their best or to pursue their efforts, so to say, to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. They also agreed that for this 1.5 degrees target, the CO2 emissions need to go down by 45% in 2030. And that same report that was released yesterday concluded that they will manage to do 2%. Not 45, 2%. It's not even the right order of magnitude. At the same time, all these reports conclude that there is simply no room left in the carbon budget for new fossil fuel extraction anywhere on the world. But at the same time, the Dutch government is aiming for new gas exploration in the North Sea, as you pointed out a week or two ago over here. And all of that is covered under the promise of CDR, which was already mentioned here. I would say it's misused by at least our politicians, because they assume that in the future the next generations will take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere on an epic scale with technologies that still have to be invented, at least to a large extent. And to quote the latest IPCC report, the choices and actions implemented in this decade will have impacts for now and for thousands of years to come. And I think we can all conclude that we're heading in a wrong direction on a highway speed, so to speak. Now, it's not that all of this is new to me or to you, I guess. The first time I was confronted with climate change was in 2006. I was 18 back then, and I watched the documentary An Inconvenient Truth by Al Gore with my father in the cinema. And I remember that we walked back home and we discussed what we should do about this topic. And it's quite telling that I don't remember what we concluded, because a few weeks later I completely forgot about it and I went on with my life. And that continued until I started my studies at Utrecht University. I did my bachelor in geology, which touches upon climate change, I would say, but then mostly from a historical perspective. And after that, I decided that I wanted to switch for my master. So I switched to the master in climate physics, which I loved. I love studying the climate system. It's incredibly complex. I think you are a climate scientist as well. You said right, or not? Oh, I could be wrong. And therefore, I decided to at least apply for a PhD, and I got one, as you already mentioned. And it was over these years that I got actually, I got more depressed, and I felt more climate anxiety basically by each year. So I started doing what most people do. I tried to reduce my own carbon footprint. I started to eat less meat and I became a vegetarian sometime later. I started to fly less and now I don't fly at all anymore. I voted for green parties, etc. But yeah, it didn't take me long before I realized that this was not going to make a massive difference. And therefore I joined fossil-free Utrecht University in 2015. And we tried to convince our university, my university back then at least, Utrecht University, for example, that they should switch banks, that they should leave ING and switch to a sustainable bank. We tried to convince them to, well, first be open about their ties with the fossil fuel industry, and then cut these ties. I think that discussion is still going on at this university. And we tried to, for example, switch, or at least let the university switch to a more sustainable catering in the cafeteria and stuff like that. So this was 2015, 16, 17, 18. And we worked on this quite a lot with about 5, 6, 7 people. But to my frustration, we didn't achieve a whole lot. The ties with the fossil fuel companies were still there and were still obscure to a large extent. They didn't switch banks, etc. So my frustration grew over the years. Until 2018, because that's when I went to the Greenland ice sheet for my PhD to do some field work, which was in many ways the best experience of my life. But it was also a time where my depression or anxiety hit peak levels. Because if you are surrounded by climate scientists for 6.5 weeks on an ice sheet and you cannot talk to anyone else except the climate scientist, then things get kind of depressing after a while. And therefore I decided on the ice sheet, I didn't know how, I didn't know when, but I knew that after my PhD, I wanted to do more than just lobbying for change and asking politely for change and signing petitions for change and walking climate marches for change. And well, first I had to finish my PhD dissertation, which took me quite a number of months. But then in the beginning of 2019, Extinction Rebellion was founded in the Netherlands. And I already had seen something about Extinction Rebellion on social media in the UK. And I was like, these people have new ideas. I'm gonna have a look there. And one of the things that struck me most about this group was that they actually talked with the same urgency and despair that I was feeling within the climate science community and definitely within myself as well. And in that sense, I think Extinction Rebellion is brutally honest about the crisis, and that's why I always emphasize that I want to start my talk with a bunch of facts about where we are in the climate crisis. And I think Extinction Rebellion takes the planetary boundaries as their guiding principles, and not what is what politicians often call politically achievable, which is a phrase that I become to distaste quite a lot. Extinction Rebellion is, as you all know, a movement that is strictly non-violent, and that is not just a moral thing to do, but science has shown us that non-violent movements also grow faster, because it's easier to join a movement where we do not throw rocks to police, but where we sit on the street and have fun at the same time. So that's characteristic one that is important. I think it's the non-violence part, and the second part, and that's the one I like most, maybe even, is that it's disruptive. We do legal stuff, we do illegal stuff, but we like to disrupt the status quo, so to speak. And it's not like these tactics are anything new. We simply copy them from movements in the past. And I just mentioned a few. The suffragettes, they didn't. They were only successful after they blocked the streets en masse. I can mention Martin Luther King, Mahatma Gandhi, the LGBT community also got their rights after they hit the streets en masse and protested. And one other famous example, of course, is Rosa Parks. She was doing this on her own, but at least she was breaking the law deliberately. And I think if you look back at history, then every major social change has happened after these type of protests. And it has become my conviction that this time it will be no different. I mean, most, not all, but most of the solutions are already there. We can implement them. We just have to implement them at an incredible speed. And we have to overcome entrenched power who are getting rich from the current system. And what I also like about Extinction Rebellion is that when you join the movement, you get prepared. You get an action training so that you know what you can expect when you join an action, and you can even decide whether you want to join an action and whether you want to have a high-risk role or a low-risk role. We also give legal briefings before each action so that you know what to expect from a legal perspective. I've been arrested, I don't know, I think about 20 to 30 times. I have no legal trouble whatsoever because they help me all the time. And that gives me actually the confidence to continue to be in these kinds of actions. We also have a mental support team, which I think has become way more important in the last couple of years since the climate news is getting more and more depressing. And I like to end this, at least my part, with two telling examples, I think, of the power of these kinds of protests. Because in 2015, Fossil Free started a campaign to ask ABP, the Dutch pension fund, I think some of you will have a pension there, to sell their shares in the fossil fuel industry. That's 2015. Until 2020, basically nothing happened. They were engaging, they were talking, they were signing petitions, and they were writing open letters. And it was only after Fossil Free threatened them with a court case and Extinction Rebellion occupied their lobby with about 3 dozen people, about 3 or 4 times. That was the moment that ABP decided to sell their shares in the fossil fuel industry, worth, I think, about 50 million, if I that was right or right. Yeah, billion indeed. Thanks. And I think the other perfect example of the strength of these types of protests is the topic of the fossil fuel subsidies. Again, since 2009, the G7 and the G20 were talking about this topic. Rutte mentioned it in 2013 for the first time that he wanted to end these fossil fuel subsidies. Absolutely nothing happened until a year ago when we started to block the A12. And now, I mean, they haven't been ended yet, but at least they are part of the political discussion. And with that, I would like to end my part of this discussion, and I kept it short because I liked the discussion quite a lot that we were having.
Thank you very much. Ernst-Jan, thank you very much. To start with a few questions, did you ever glue yourself to the asphalt of the in The Hague, the A12 it was? Yeah.
No, I did it once in Amsterdam. I did it once in Amsterdam, somewhere in the middle of the Zuidas. I think in front of ING or whatever. But I personally don't like gluing myself to stuff. So
who does like this?
My hand got stuck in an uncomfortable way, and I couldn't get it well.
And then the police is coming with cola to dissolve
exactly. So the police uses Coca-Cola to dissolve the
glue.
Tells you a lot about what Coca-Cola does to your stomach.
And isn't this type of activism demanding of you physically, because it's very uncomfortable, but also mentally, I think? Or weren't you afraid? Because I read about people who got in their cars very upset that the road is blocked and they drive into the activists, that might be very upsetting. Could you say, comment a little bit on this?
Yeah, that's quite upsetting. Yeah, that people get so upset that they basically are okay with driving through a protest.
Yes.
Yeah, that shocked me definitely. But in terms of, is it energizing? To be honest, the first couple of times I got arrested, my heartbeat was about 200. I guess or at least that's what I assume.
Yeah.
But the more often you do it, the less exciting it becomes.
You get used to it. Yeah.
You get used to it, and especially if you have the confidence of having a good action training and a legal team behind you. And nowadays also that we have the numbers, because at the A12 I think a couple of hundred of people got arrested each and every day, and the police simply didn't. They didn't even have the capacity to basically process all these people. And I think in Extinction Rebellion we often say that courage is a muscle that you can train. You just have to do it a couple of times, and then you get used to it.
And your heartbeat drops, and you're very tranquil when you're in a police station.
Yeah, but I also would like to emphasize that what you see in the media is the people getting arrested, but behind them are many people who are doing equally important work in terms of organizing everything, social media, legal stuff.
PR,
but you often don't see them. But what they're doing is at least as important. I think.
Just curious, did you also activists? Did you get arrested once, or yes?
More than once. The first couple of times, my heartbeat was also high, but now. So the first time was on Schiphol Airport. I blocked together with, I believe, 700 other activists, the private jets.
Yeah, I was there as well.
Then nothing happens. I was put into a bus for, I believe, 5 hours, and then they discovered that they didn't have the capacity. They let everybody go. So then it was fine, and then the first actual arrest was, my heartbeat was quite high, but I was well prepared, so it was all fine.
Okay, wow, that's really quite courageous to do such a thing. Yeah, okay.
I don't want to talk about my own experiences with activism, but I want to emphasize one point that I think got across very strongly during your talk. I don't research the climate system, but more like drivers of emissions, so like human behaviors driving emissions, and it also resulted in a lot of anxiety with me, how I see how the behavior of people around me is driving this crisis, how it's not changing, how there are really strong forces to keep certain behaviors and so on in place. And I think that also the juxtaposition that was posed in the invitation here was a bit okay, is it better to do activism or to do science? And I think the answer is to do both. And also that partially for me, then I always oscillate between those two things. For sometimes activism is too populist for me, or sometimes I think, okay, I'm not so sure about this claim, but sometimes then the research is too passive for me, so I cannot only observe the things that are driving the crisis and just be kind of objective while we're all involved in the system and dependent on the system. So yeah, I think you made that clear quite beautifully in your talk, how these things are very connected.
Yeah. So for you it's both. I'm very curious, Albert and Cheryl, did you ever consider yourself gluing yourself to an artwork or become an activist? Could you comment on this?
No. I think you admire them. Absolutely, I respect them. Yeah. I didn't do it myself, but and I don't really consider it, maybe at some point, but not at this moment. But I want to ask you, how do you pick your actions? What is acceptable, what is not acceptable? I mean, would you burn the Nachtwacht, for instance, or so to get attention? I mean, there's limits, I guess, to what you do. But how do you pick your actions?
I come back to you, Cheryl, and your activism. But it's an interesting question, because it's about violence. And you said it's non-violent.
Exactly. I would frame burning the Nachtwacht as violence.
Gluing yourself, is that not a form of violence? Because you might harm a very expensive artwork.
Yeah, no, that's true. And there's a lot of discussion going on within Extinction Rebellion about this. In terms of gluing yourself to a painting, the couple of times that happened, there was a glass plate before the painting, and they knew that. Whether Extinction Rebellion or some similar group, like Just Stop Oil, or well, they're not similar, but a related group, we'll take the next step. I don't know. I hope they don't, personally. But I know that people are getting so depressed that, and they're getting so anxious that I'm afraid they will at a certain point. And I'm not justifying that, but I'm afraid that at a certain point, some people will snap and go over what has become acceptable. Also, because I think by now throwing a can of soup to a painting is not that newsworthy anymore. So you also need to go one step further, or at least be more creative in that sense. I would not be willing to do that, because I'm just afraid to do that, and my girlfriend won't let me. I think. Yeah.
But the point is, you want to draw attention.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and you can't do that
Completely without any violence. That would be good for you.
Yeah, definitely.
But you see that in practice, you need to do a little bit of, because you can say even the A12, blocking the A12, some people will feel that also as a violation of their freedom, so to say. So it's in practice, it's difficult to say.
Yeah.
But I think if you are very creative, I think there may be ways to get a lot of attention without.
Definitely.
And, I mean, that is the challenge, I think, because then you also win the hearts of the public more than if you.
Yeah, and I mean, Extinction Rebellion is also organized in a very decentralized way, so people can do stuff in the name of Extinction Rebellion as long as they stick to the 10 guiding principles. One of them being non-violence, another one, for example, being that we don't want to blame individuals because we blame the system. But that also, in practice, can be hard when you talk to politicians, when you talk to a CEO. Sometimes you're on the edge, or maybe even over the edge, of blaming a certain person for a certain decision. So I'm not sure if you have anything to add, but I think it's a gray area, right? Or
No, it's very difficult. Yeah.
I want to add that it's a luxury also to not engage in violent action, because we have liberal Western democracies. We can tell ourselves a nice illusion that politicians will do anything if we ask often enough, that political economy wouldn't have any impact on the kind of decisions being taken there. But in other parts of the world, that's not so much the case. And activists do much more drastic measures. For example, you have in Canada pipeline going through indigenous territory, and that's being blown up by the community with the full right, I would say, because it's polluting their territory and violating their rights. And if the oppressive state of Canada is engaged in the violence, then they have to fight back. In Germany, the activist community of Ende Gelände is also going already a step further. They didn't do actions this year, but like Ende Gelände is mostly doing actions against coal infrastructure in Germany. And for a long time, they have been doing mass actions of civil disobedience, just blocking coal infrastructure with their bodies for years and years, but nothing has happened with like tens of thousands of people they were there. So like in comparison to this, Extinction Rebellion in the Netherlands is very small. And this year they changed their action consensus and explicitly including sabotage of existing fossil infrastructure. So we are already at the point elsewhere, especially where they don't have the luxury, to not engage in violence because they're being attacked by violent bodies like states. And in Europe, there is already a change because nothing is happening.
Okay. I'll just go back to Cheryl, because there was one question hanging in the air. Did you ever consider yourself to be an activist somewhere with Extinction Rebellion or on your own? Or
Yeah, no. Yeah, so I certainly have considered it because I respect certainly everyone that is willing to do it, and I thank them all for it because I know that it costs quite a lot of energy and effort and courage. I personally am really afraid of crowds. So I know I've for my whole life had this fear of being around too many people at once, and so this maybe and I feel guilty of using that as an excuse, but it sort of makes it the extra sort of step for me to take to do those things. But I do feel guilty that I don't take that extra step in honesty, right? So I do then try to do all of the other things that I can do in order to also create some kind of change.
Maybe they will invent some kind of solo actions for you especially, but we'll I want to ask you to come to sit next to me. But first a question to Ernst-Jan about Greenland ice sheet. You are very worried about it. You mentioned a tipping point. What could happen to the ice sheet? What could you explain this tipping point? What will happen?
The basic idea is quite simple. You have an ice sheet, you warm the atmosphere a little bit, the ice sheet melts a little bit. You warm the atmosphere a little bit more, the ice sheet melts a little bit more. You warm the atmosphere a little bit more, and the whole thing collapses.
Okay.
That's when you reach the tipping point.
Yeah, then it won't grow anymore in winter times.
Exactly, yeah. And exactly, plus if you get back to your original state, like the pre-industrial temperature, the ice sheet won't grow back.
Yeah.
That's the... And in this case, this example is for an ice sheet, but there are many other tipping points within the climate system. The uncertainty there is massive, but we think that we will pass about three to four tipping points above 1.5 degrees, and we're basically almost there. In terms of the ice sheet, it will take centuries. Don't get me wrong, but by then the die is cast, right? That's what they say. There's no way back anymore. And actually, so this is about Greenland, but about a week ago, a paper was published about the Western Arctic ice sheet, which claimed that we probably already passed the tipping point for Western Antarctica. And the authors conclude that even if we stay within the 1.5 degree target, and the authors concluded that, I quote, politicians should prepare for multiple, or I think several, meters of sea level rise. So that's coming our way, at least in the somewhat medium long term.
Okay.
Luckily for you, you live in Enschede, or at least most of you.
20 meters.
I live in Amersfoort, which is already basically on the edge. But I have family in Amsterdam. But
and the people in Tuvalu, I think that's the islands. They are flooded completely.
Exactly. Because we in the Netherlands can at least afford dikes and stuff like that, but these people can't.
Goodness, yes. I see a question. Go ahead.
First of all, thank you all so much for the talks. That's very interesting. I just wanted to clarify something because you asked a lot of people if they glue themselves, and you said that you don't like crowds. I just wanted to also mention that there are so many different things where you can engage activistically. For example, I know also some people that do not feel comfortable in crowds. They, for example, like to bake something for the people that are actually on the streets, or painting banners, for example, is also something that I like a lot. So there are so many different opportunities. It's not really only gluing themselves, so just saying. And I had a question. Do you think that it would be possible that the Climate Center and the activists, or maybe the activistic students and stuff on campus also could work together?
Please. Why not? Yeah, definitely. And thanks also for those points about baking things and whatnot. Because I think.
Are you a good baker, or can you good cook?
I'm a good cook, but not such a good baker. My husband can bake well.
But can cook dinner or something. Okay.
But it's about choices, right? So we all have also only so many hours in the day, and I think it's really important to think about, and that's again for me going back to that ikigai, right? So where can I use my energy and make the most impact? What are my skills? Where are my connections? Where can I actually have an impact? Some of us have children, right? And while that's also a really good reason to do these things, and some of us have an 11-week-old child
Very young
now.
child, yeah.
And so those things take also a lot of time.
Yes.
And so we try to also be there for them and do these things. And so I really believe in thinking about, where can you make the most impact.
Yeah, yeah. And your second remark, that was very interesting. How could you, as activists, work together? Yeah, maybe you could comment a little bit.
We can invite you to come to the climate cafes, and I don't know if you've been there already, but otherwise you're always welcome. And to bring in your points. I mean, we really like to have all sides giving inputs and open. And we are academics, so I mean, we are really open for this type of sounds. Yes. Doesn't mean we're going to join you, but no. But I mean, like you say, what is the most effective way for us? It's, I think, to do this climate center, because that at least gives visibility here and motivates people. Yeah, yeah. But if you are happy with that, I'm also perfectly fine. Yes. And it's very good that you do it. It's necessary. Absolutely.
And I think it's for you, you're, sorry to say, a little bit older already. Good to have a younger generation.
What do you mean?
young people with new perspectives. I think that's very important. And it's nice to see you.
My hands cannot be glued anymore. That's
okay. Let me see. There were some more questions over here. Go ahead. You were first, I think.
Well, yeah, I guess I know Cheryl and Albert, so my question goes more towards the middle. But I think with the climate activism, I can definitely see the value, and I can see why you would be motivated to do it. But lately, as I talk to people who are, let's say, outside the academia and might be less exposed to data, even if they're inclined to take sustainable actions, they very often feel the narrative that emerges is that they feel they're pushed in the corner, they're being told what to do, and it actually pushes them to go more towards far right and vote in an opposite direction. And see, like, if your movement is about pushing for the change, have you considered the risk of pushing pretty big proportion in an opposite direction?
You're suggesting that might be counter-effective. Well,
polarizing,
maybe. Polarizing people. Yeah, okay, good question.
That's a risk.
Yeah, definitely. Are we polarizing? I think we are. Yeah, definitely. A lot of people got upset when we blocked the highway or the A12. But I still think that's better than doing nothing. Because I think the most telling statistic, or whatever you call it, was, and I don't recall the exact numbers, but it was something like 30% of the Netherlands supported our actions at the A12, but 80% supported stopping fossil fuel subsidies. And I'm fine with that. They might hate me or they might hate us, as long as we get a certain message across that they can agree on. Personally, I'm fine with that. My skin has grown thick enough, luckily over the years. But I do agree with you that my gut feeling is that many people vote to the far right because they hate the measures that are necessary to counter climate change, which some answers lay in technology, but also a lot of answers lay in not doing stuff anymore, which they see as taking their freedom. And to add to that, but that's maybe more somewhat of an academic answer, I've been reading quite a lot of the International Energy Agency reports for my current job, and it's full of details and numbers, etc. But the topic that comes on top most is that what they call the energy trilemma. So whenever a politician has to do something with energy, he or she has to balance both sustainability, affordability, and energy security. Those are the three pillars of the energy debate. And now, for the first time, basically in history, all these three pillars are pointing in the same direction. They're pointing towards the same answer. If you want energy security, then you should not be dependent on gas from Russia. Then you should be dependent on wind from the North Sea. And of course, energy efficiency. If you want a lower price, same. If you want sustainability, of course, same. And I think this message is something that we also, as Extinction Rebellion, need to get across. That, you know, the lives of the people, of basically everyone will get better once we have a sustainable energy system. And I mean, the road towards that sustainable energy system will probably be bumpy and full of crashes and crises, etc. But if we look at where we're going, that's a way better world than we have right now. And when I'm talking about affordability, that doesn't even include the cost of fossil fuel in terms of climate change and in terms of healthcare. That's not even in that equation. And I think this is a message we should get across more often, because, I mean, this is, at least in my opinion, is a very strong message, that their world will actually get better.
What do you expect of tomorrow, the elections? Is the message, did it came across enough? Or
No, but may I ask another question?
Yeah,
If you were now the biggest party in Netherlands and you could do anything you want in Netherlands, what would you do?
What would I do?
Yeah, what is your, I mean, you are now not in power, but suppose you are in power. You can really say, this is what we have to do. What would you do now?
I would set a climate neutrality date by 2030 at the latest. I would declare a climate emergency nationally. I would forbid all new drillings for fossil gas and oil and coal, obviously. My personal view would be that we would need something like a job guarantee program where people can work for a decent salary on the energy transition.
But that means also in 10 years or 7 years, you need to be completely out of fossil fuel. How would you solve that, the energy?
Well, I mean, it can be done. I mean, for example...
but I'm just correct. I also believe that, but what would you do? Massive solar power plants or so, or massive windmills? Because you have a lot of energy demand, and you cannot rely on fossil fuels. I mean, but what do you do?
I mean, I think in the Netherlands, about half of the energy demand comes from 20% of the people. So these are the people that need to make most sacrifice. I mean, on a global scale, this is even way more screwed.
So it means forbid flying, forbid transport. I mean,
to a large extent,
we have to be realistic.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, yeah,
it's
definitely.
easy to say we have to transit.
No, but
I agree with you, but it means really sacrificing and paying a lot of more tax for whatever stuff to create money to do other things.
Yeah, absolutely. We've left it too late for a smooth transition now, and I agree with you. I mean, this is not the view of Extinction Rebellion, by the way. This is what you're asking on my personal views.
No, but I could also ask: is there a view of Extinction Rebellion? Is there a scenario which you would do if you would have power? I can imagine that you come up with a scenario and say, okay, if we want to go to 2030, it means, let's say everybody pays 20% more tax, and maybe even people, you have progressive tax. Okay, I'm fine with that if you say that. And that gives money to pay all the solar panels you have to install, or whatever, wind turbines. Yeah. But I think it would help us if you have a concrete scenario.
Yeah, I think...
So that we know where to go.
Yeah, true, but that's also quite dangerous, because then people will not like a certain scenario. And
yeah, but the alternative is there's no alternative.
Well, Extinction Rebellion is our third demand is that we install a civil, what do you call it? Citizens Assembly, where people actually take these decisions. Because if you let people decide over their own faith, over their own sacrifices which have to be made, they are willing to do way more than sacrifices that are forced top down. Or at least that's my conviction. Do you want to add something?
There are many questions. I continue with you. Is that okay?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you all for your talks. I'm bringing this back to the small, because you said you're the climate center and you're here to support us as students and staff. And you mentioned education. What? Closer? Oh, sorry. You mentioned education, you mentioned research funds, and you mentioned maybe connecting natural scientists and technicians to social scientists. And I was wondering, are there other ways you're thinking of making this supporting connections, or are these the three pillars? And I was also wondering, maybe from your perspective as a researcher as well, I don't know whether Utrecht has a climate center or not, or had one, but what would you wish as a researcher that a climate center could provide to researchers?
Albert?
Well, yeah, first of all, I think any suggestion of other ways that we could do is welcome. We just started with some vague idea, wanted to do it. We had no exact idea how it would look like. So if you have some good suggestions of what we could do, please tell us, because we are open for everything. And then the question about research, my dream also would be that there would be sufficient funds, for instance, in the climate fund, would be also made available for research. It's not the case, because it's not for research, but it would be helpful. And that we then have a national climate idea or initiative. There is this KIN, but that's not really focusing at, it's really looking at system transitions, which is absolutely good. But I also believe we have a lot of power in all kinds of knowledge that we can put together in a kind of Manhattan Project type thing to really work together towards things like in 2030 fully fossil free. And then I think we can do a lot from all the perspectives, from all the fields of science. And that is what I think slowly could emerge from this type of things. But well, it takes conviction and young people to support it, absolutely.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the Manhattan Project, because there was a lot of pressure to build the atomic bomb, of course,
well,
because there was a war.
It's super urgent, I think.
But this has the same urgency, only people don't feel it, I'm afraid. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm myself not a member of Extinction Rebellion, and I have a question for those who are, because I'm in the newspapers recently, I see more and more also statements about the Israel-Palestina conflict. Could any of you share your take on that? Because to me it sounds counter-effective of the message about the climate importance.
Maybe a short comment, because otherwise we get a little bit
And if you want to comment,
off topic.
I can comment.
Ernst-Jan, you could please go ahead.
My own view, but let me emphasize this is my view. I agree with you. I think from a strategic perspective, this was not a very smart decision. Although, I mean, it all fired back down on Extinction Rebellion, but as I understood it, it was the entire organization of the Climate March doing this, so it's not just Extinction Rebellion. But this is a topic that is, well, we're discussing it internally since the day this happened. And we're still not sure on how to continue. But my personal opinion is that I agree with you. That we, although I agree with the statement that was made, or at least largely, I have a slightly more nuanced view, I guess. And the same with goes for Kick-Out Zwarte Piet, where Extinction Rebellion is also allying with Kick-Out Zwarte Piet. I fully support Kick-Out Zwarte Piet, but I don't think we should support that movement publicly. But one of you might have a different perspective, so you can, or at least I'm okay with.
I want to go back to the climate. You have a question about the climate, or yeah? And then we can discuss this issue afterwards, maybe.
Well, first of all, I do agree that this is a very important point. I mean, I was thinking a lot about it since the climate march, so I think it's a very. My question is not about this, but I was shocked and had lots of discussions when that happened on the podium. My question was, the elections were mentioned. I spent a lot of tomorrow. These past weeks, I spent a lot of time out in the streets campaigning in the context of the elections, and I spoke to lots and lots of people that I would have never in my life spoken to normally if I would not have had folders in my hand. And do you know? Are you gonna, stemmen, right? Are you gonna participate in the elections? And what was shocking to me, and I have a question to the three of you, was that my impression was that really half of the people that I spoke to did not share the sense of urgency that we all feel here, right? Whether it's Extinction Rebellion or the Climate Center. Half of the political parties don't share that sense of urgency. It seemed to me, talking to these people about what they were concerned about and how they thought about the climate crisis, that a lot of them live in what we would call a bubble of disinformation, which was already mentioned, that is partially financed by industry. Do you have any ideas, because this has a huge impact, for example, tomorrow, is there any ideas of, could we do something in that direction? Do you have any thoughts, whether it's the Climate Center or Extinction Rebellion? How could we reach people in disinformation bubbles who are not feeling that sense of urgency?
Oh, very important question. Well, who of you would like to start? Albert.
Yeah, I agree. And I also feel that people miss the urgency. And I think the problem is that this is what we call a slow disaster. People are used to quick disasters. Okay, they can oversee that. But if something is slow, day to day, there's not a lot of things that happen. And I think that and then there's the other thing, it's slow. So it's beyond the 4-year period of politicians. You have to take very negative measures in order to counter it, and that will be punished at the next elections if you do that. But that is the failure of politicians. They have and maybe not only politicians, but even, I think, people at certain universities, so to say, that they don't look farther. They have no long-term vision, and they don't have the guts to express them and to warn people that something really has to be done, and they sacrifice, in fact, their own political life for the greater good of the good measures. I think this is really the point.
Maybe if I could add something too. So I think that there's, I obviously don't have the answer to this and I don't know how to change it, but what I do see as a role for university, but also the sections and the ROC's and all of the other sort of knowledge institutes, is that we really take up that responsibility to have an open conversation about these things, right? And I think that where possible, and a little bit knowing your audience, try to be as neutral as possible, right? So what I recognize in some of my research, for example, is that sometimes when we go into the community and we talk with people, they assume you have a particular point of view. And that makes them less willing to discuss with you. And so I think really sort of having an open mind when we go out and we talk to the community can build a bit more of a sense of trust between the community and the knowledge institutes. And I think that this is something that takes time to build, right? So we live, I think, in a world now where there are a lot of people who don't trust universities and they don't trust science and they don't trust any of these things. And we have to deal with that, right? And I think that yelling harder doesn't help everybody, right? And so then the question is, what does, right? And so I think building that trust, trying to have open conversations is one step, at least in that direction.
Yeah. And Sven, you would like to comment on this?
I don't have a lot to add, but I once read a saying, I don't know who, but he or she said that most people care more about making the end of the month than they care about the end of the world. And I think that's also, I think there's a lot of truth there.
Okay, yeah, that's I think an interesting summary. Final question, then we have to round it off because it's for a decade, yes, but it's 9 o'clock and we have to, Ernst-Jan has to go to Amersfoort. But
yeah, I will try to make it really brief. It's to address the kind of like Q&A that was going on in the panel, Albert, when you were asking Ernst-Jan about So what would you do if you were in power, and you know, and you were really going at like, give us the answer right now. But I hope this doesn't come as like passive aggressive or anything. But I think that it's not really fruitful to frame the questions in such a way, because yes, it is true, you know, that Extinction Rebellion has a principle or like has a goal of creating citizens' assemblies. But I think that, you know, like the underlying goal of this is to create a dialogue and a conversation where a lot of perspectives can come into place. If you ask someone or a specific group, you know, like what is the solution, what should we do, and like how to move forward, you are risking that, you know, like that a single perspective is gonna push through. And I personally think it's also kind of like a recipe for like an authoritarian, eco-fascist type of solution. And so I think that this also comes relevant to the question that was being asked about, okay, where do we stand in, you know, like the conflicts or wars, you know, like what is happening in Gaza. I think that, you know, like it's not like, it shouldn't be an answer that comes from one single person. Like there might be people who disagree about what is the role of this conflict in the movement, right? But that's why we need to have a dialogue, and that's why we need to ask, you know, for instance, like how does the Jewish community feel about this? How does the Muslim community feel about this? And, you know, I just want us to invite us to not try and find the solutions from a single movement or a single group, but this is why coalitions are important. And, you know, what is the solution is something that we should all be trying to discuss democratically, how to move forward and not seek the solution from a single person.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Good point.
Yeah,
definitely.
a good point. And I think these students are a very great addition to the Climate Center. Absolutely. I think, absolutely, yeah. Unfortunately, we have to round off because you can ask questions informally. I want to thank you, the three of you, very much for your involvement. You're very much involved in very different ways. It was very, very impressive. I wish you good luck tomorrow in the voting. All of you, of course. That's, I'm very, very worried what might come out of this election, but we will see. And I want a warm applause for the three of you. Thank you very much.